September 12, 1982. Two stepsisters left a small apartment in downtown Lewiston, Idaho, for what should have been a routine grocery run. Kristina Nelson, 21, scribbled a quick note for her boyfriend explaining where she was going. 18-year-old Jacqueline Brandi Miller grabbed her jacket and followed her older stepsister out into the cool evening air. The grocery store was only a few blocks away, an easy walk through the familiar streets of their college town. They expected to be back within the hour with whatever items they needed. Instead, Kristina and Brandi stepped into the darkness and vanished completely, becoming part of a nightmare that would haunt the Lewis-Clark Valley for decades. What makes their disappearance particularly chilling isn't just that two young women vanished without a trace on the same night. It's that their planned route would have taken them directly past the Lewiston Civic Theater, where their friend Steven Pearsall was working alone as a janitor. By morning, all three would be missing, and investigators would begin to uncover connections that suggested something far more sinister than random disappearances. Tonight, we explore the case of Kristina Nelson and Brandi Miller, two stepsisters whose simple trip to the grocery store became the centerpiece of one of the Pacific Northwest's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Kristina Diane Nelson and Jacqueline Ann Brandi Miller were typical college students navigating life in the small town of Lewiston. Kristina, at 21, was the older and more responsible of the pair, attending Lewis-Clark State College and working various jobs to support herself. She had previously worked as a janitor at the Lewiston Civic Theater before leaving the position, which was then taken over by Steven Pearsall, a gentleman who became like a protective older brother to both young women. 18-year-old Brandi was also enrolled at the college, following in her stepsister's footsteps and trying to find her place in the world. The two women shared an apartment near downtown Lewiston, living the independent lifestyle that comes with college years. They were both involved with the local theater scene, having worked on productions at the Civic Theater that served as the cultural heart of their community. Their connection to the theater would prove significant in ways they could never have imagined. Kristina was known for being organized and thoughtful, the type of person who left notes explaining her whereabouts and took responsibility for practical matters like grocery shopping. Brandi was more carefree but equally devoted to her family relationships, particularly the bond she shared with Kristina despite their being stepsisters rather than biological siblings. On September 12th, the stepsisters had spent a quiet Sunday at home, probably studying or relaxing like any other college students. As evening approached, they realized they needed items from the grocery store, a common enough occurrence in their independent household. Kristina left a note for her boyfriend explaining that she and Brandi were walking to the store and would be back shortly. It was the kind of considerate gesture that defined her personality, ensuring that no one would worry about their brief absence. The route to their preferred grocery store would take them through downtown Lewiston, past several familiar landmarks including the Civic Theater where they both had connections. The walk from their apartment to the store should have taken no more than 15 or 20 minutes each way, even allowing time to browse and make purchases. Lewiston in 1982 was still the kind of place where young women felt safe walking alone after dark, where neighbors knew each other and crime was relatively rare. The downtown area was well lit and regularly patrolled, offering no obvious dangers to two college-age women making a routine trip. Both Kristina and Brandi were familiar with the area, having lived and worked in Lewiston for months or years. There was no reason to expect that this ordinary evening would be any different from countless others they'd experienced. The timeline of September 12th reveals how an ordinary evening transformed into a mystery that would consume investigators for years. Kristina and Brandi left their apartment sometime in the evening, with Kristina's note serving as the only record of their intentions. Their planned route would have taken them directly past the Lewiston Civic Theater, where Steven Pearsall was scheduled to work alone that night. The Civic Theater sat prominently in downtown Lewiston, impossible to miss on their walk to the grocery store. Both women knew the building well from their previous involvement with theater productions and Kristina's former employment there. What happened during those crucial hours between their departure and the discovery of their absence remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Neither woman made it to the grocery store that night. with no witnesses reporting having seen them at their intended destination. Their route through downtown Lewiston should have made them visible to other pedestrians, drivers, or business owners, yet no reliable sightings emerged from the investigation. The downtown area where they vanished wasn't isolated or particularly dangerous, making their complete disappearance all the more inexplicable. The discovery that Steven Pearsall had also vanished from the Civic Theater on the same night transformed the case from a missing persons investigation into something far more sinister. The coincidence of 3 people disappearing simultaneously from the same small area of downtown Lewiston was too significant to ignore. Investigators began to piece together the connections between the victims: Kristina's former job at the theater, Steven's current position there, and the likelihood that the women had passed by or possibly entered the building on their way to the store. The Civic Theater began to emerge as the focal point of whatever had happened that night. The search for Kristina and Brandi expanded rapidly as law enforcement and volunteers combed through Lewiston and the surrounding areas. Unlike Steven, who had left personal items behind that suggested an interrupted routine, the women had apparently taken nothing with them that might serve as clues. Their apartment yielded little evidence beyond Kristina's note, and their planned destination at the grocery store provided no leads. The complete absence of physical evidence or witness testimony created a void that investigators struggled to fill, even as they became increasingly convinced that the women's disappearance was connected to Steven's simultaneous vanishing. The investigation revealed unsettling details about the theater's operations and the people who had access to the building. The same person of interest who had been present when Kristina White disappeared in 1979 was also active at the Civic Theater and had worked alongside Steven on the day of the disappearances. This individual had intimate knowledge of the theater's layout, including basement storage areas and multiple entrances that could facilitate the concealment of criminal activity. The theater's central location in downtown Lewiston, combined with its after-hours accessibility to certain employees, made it an ideal location for someone planning violent crimes. The breakthrough in the case came nearly 2 years later on March 19, 1984, when hunters discovered human remains in a rural area near Kendrick, Idaho, about 35 miles from Lewiston. The decomposed bodies were identified as those of Kristina Nelson and Brandi Miller, finally providing answers to the question of their fate while raising even more disturbing questions about their final hours. The remote location where their bodies were found suggested careful planning by their killer, someone who knew the area well enough to select a spot where the remains might never be discovered. The prevailing theory among investigators is that Kristina and Brandi encountered their killer at or near the Lewiston Civic Theater during their walk to the grocery store. Given their familiarity with the building and their connection to Steven Pearsall, they may have decided to stop by the theater to visit him, unknowingly walking into a deadly trap. The person of interest who was active at the theater that night could have used the women's trust and familiarity with the building to lure them inside, where he would have had complete control over the situation. This theory explains why all 3 individuals disappeared simultaneously, and why no witnesses reported seeing the women on the street after they left their apartment. Another compelling theory suggests that the women witnessed something at the theater that made them dangerous to the perpetrators' plans. If they saw evidence of criminal activity or arrived during the commission of another crime, they would have become immediate threats that needed to be eliminated. The timing of their disappearance, coinciding exactly with Steven's vanishing, supports the idea that they all encountered the same person under circumstances that left no survivors. This scenario would explain the methodical cleanup that appeared to have taken place at the theater and the careful disposal of bodies in a remote location. Some investigators have considered whether the women were specifically targeted rather than becoming victims of circumstance. Kristina's former employment at the theater and both women's involvement in local productions would have made them known to the suspect, potentially making them attractive targets for someone escalating their criminal behavior. The theory suggests that their trip to the grocery store provided the perfect opportunity for someone who had been planning to harm them, using their predictable route and the theater's location to intercept them. However, this theory struggles to explain Steven's simultaneous disappearance unless he was also specifically targeted. The most disturbing theory is that the Civic Theater was being systematically used as a killing ground by someone with legitimate access to the building. The suspect's position at the theater would have given him opportunities to study potential victims, plan crimes, and dispose of evidence using the building's resources. Kristina and Brandi's disappearance, along with Steven's, may represent just one night in a longer pattern of criminal activity centered around the theater. This theory is supported by the connections between multiple victims in the Lewis-Clark Valley cluster and the theater's central role in several cases, suggesting a predator who used his legitimate position to facilitate his crimes. 42 years have passed since Kristina Nelson and Brandi Miller left their apartment for a simple grocery run that would become their final journey. The note Kristina left for her boyfriend explaining their brief errand remains as a haunting reminder of how quickly ordinary life can spiral into tragedy. While their bodies were eventually found in 1984, the questions surrounding their final hours continue to torment everyone connected to the case. What happened during those crucial minutes when they passed by or entered the Civic Theater? Who convinced two street-smart college women to deviate from their planned route? Most importantly, why has their killer never faced justice? The discovery of their remains near Kendrick provided closure of a sort, but also revealed the calculated nature of their murders. Someone had taken the time to transport their bodies 35 miles from Lewiston to a remote location where they might never have been found. The methodical disposal suggests a killer who was experienced in covering his tracks, someone who understood how to make evidence disappear. The fact that it took nearly 2 years for their bodies to be discovered speaks to the perpetrator's knowledge of the local geography and his confidence in his ability to evade detection. Perhaps most heartbreaking is the realization that Kristina and Brandi's connection to the theater, which should have been a source of creative fulfillment and community involvement, may have been what ultimately led to their deaths. Their friendship with Steven Pearsall, their familiarity with the Civic Theater, and their willingness to trust people in their community became vulnerabilities that a predator exploited. The same qualities that made them beloved by friends and family, their openness and trust, may have made them perfect victims for someone who understood how to manipulate those virtues. As investigators continue working the Lewis-Clark Valley cases, the story of Kristina Nelson and Brandi Miller serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades. Their killer walked among their friends, worked in their community, and gained their trust before destroying their lives. Until someone finally speaks the truth about what happened at the Civic Theater that September night, two young women who deserved so much more from life will remain frozen in time, forever walking toward a grocery store they would never reach.